Good afternoon. Welcome to the Trulaske Business Insider Series. My name is Ajay Vinze, and I'm delighted to welcome all of you to this edition of the Trulaske Business Insider. Today, we are tackling an important issue, most timely. We are going to be speaking about opportunities for advancement, gender bias in the workplace. We have an outstanding group of panelists over here, and a moderator who would walk us through the important details for that. The panelists include Christine Matthews from AT&T, Asim Samidin, principal at MSD, and Rachel Tobin, who was formerly with the Bank of America. Our moderator for this session is Joel Andrus, professor here in the Department of Management. Thank you to all of you, and welcome to the Business Insider Series. Joel?
Right. Yes, thank you, Dean. And I just wanted to thank each of you for attending today. This is the culmination of a lot of work. I really appreciate our panelists taking time out of their very busy schedules. They're here solely to help, and I appreciate more than they know, I think, their participation and their help with this. I want to just take a couple of minutes and just talk a little bit about what gender bias is before we move into more of the panel discussion. I'm hoping it will give you a bit of a framework to maybe understand what's going on, what has happened, and where things are going in the future with gender bias. And I would also add probably with other types of biases. So biases are something that everyone has. Okay, as human beings, we're not immune to biases. Everyone has bias and many types of biases. In most instances, our brains use these biases as a way to help us make decisions more quickly. Sometimes it's a way to deal with uncertainty. When we don't have a lot of information about someone, we rely on very visible characteristics of that person. It could be race, it could be gender, it could be the way they dress, the way they talk, their accent. All of these things give us just these quick clues that we're able to then make some judgments about a person. With that said, I want to talk, and this has been talked a lot about in the sociology literature over the last 20 years, but it's really helped me better understand some of the things that are happening. So there's two main outcomes of gender bias in the workplace. One is what's known as a horizontal segregation. And what I mean by this is if you look at different occupations, some have a high percentage of women or a high percentage of men. So if you think about like elementary teachers, if you think about nursing, if you think about engineering, if you think about typically about like the really core science fields, each of these is highly skewed to either mostly men or mostly women. That horizontal segregation, that horizontal separation, to a large degree has made a lot of progress over the last, I would say, 30 to 40 years. Generally speaking, women have a lot more access into some of these occupations than they would have even 10 or 20 years ago. I graduated and practiced engineering for about a decade. When I went to school, I had one female classmate that is substantially higher now. As I work with my business students, there's usually about a 50 to 50 split between female and male, which is really good. The second type that I think is more problematic and that tends to be a lot more sticky is what's known as a vertical segregation, vertical sex segregation. And vertical sex segregation involves hierarchy, involves power, involves status. And generally speaking, this type of bias, this type of outcome from bias is alive and well in just about every organization. Generally speaking, as a woman tries to move up the ladder, so to speak, this type of bias really restricts her ability to do so. Vertical segregation is all about preserving existing status, existing hierarchies. So if you've probably heard about things like the glass cliff phenomenon, the glass ceiling effect, those are great examples of what vertical segregation does. So that said, we're going to just move into our discussion. I want to spend about the next 20 minutes talking about how does bias actually happen in the workplace with respect to gender. So I'm going to open it up now. We'll primarily focus on the panelists from here on out. At the end, we're going to have a question and answer portion. So you'll be able to submit questions through the chat, and then we'll be able to try and answer those as best we can. This will be recorded. So if you want to share it or look at it later, this will be posted in about a week's time on YouTube. But again, thank you for participating. Christine, if you don't mind, we'll lead off with you maybe. What are some experiences that you've had in your career with gender bias?
Sure. Thanks, Joel. Can you guys hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Yeah, I think, first of all, thanks for having me. And I would say they come in many different forms. And one thing I would also note, so I'll share some of my experiences, but I also think, there are studies that have shown, not just women, but then women of color also experience, maybe even more accentuated forms of this. So I think that's just something to keep in mind, as I share my experience. It's definitely not the worst. There are people, that have, depending on their demographic, that may have a much harder experience. But I think some of the things, being a professional, I'm about 11 years into my career, a lot of questions asked around, when are you going to start a family? And I think a lot of times the things that I experience is that people don't mean it most times in a mean way. They're just trying to be friendly, make conversation. But then there's some subconscious things that start to happen, such as, hey, I don't know that you can rotate into this next role. It's high visibility. There's a lot of responsibility. And if you're going to be, on maternity leave to go have a child, like we can't consider you for that. So I think things like that I've started to notice, well, wait, that maybe that's not the case. And so I've noticed things like that. I've also experienced kind of this phenomenon, and I don't know what it's called, but especially in a lot of the meetings I'm in, I'm the only woman in the room, just the industry that I'm in. We're trying to make a lot of progress on that, but they immediately will look at me and say, are you taking notes? Are you going to provide the minutes to the meeting? Are you going to take the action items? And so I think I didn't notice that at first, but it became more apparent to me, things like that. I was like, well, everybody here is capable of taking notes, So I think little, almost kind of microaggressions like that. And again, people that have, many times don't even know that they do that. A lot of the classic ones of people talking over you, things like that. I think some too that are a little bit more subliminal that I've noticed about myself. And if you do some reading, as probably many people have, not seeing myself as able to do a certain role. So as an example, when I look at a job description and not seeing myself as fully qualified for something, and having to have a lot of mentors along the way that push me and say, well, you don't have to have every qualification to apply for a job. And so a little bit of, trying to instill confidence in myself that, I have to exude confidence that I can do things for other people to see that as well. So I think that's how I've kind of seen a little bit of kind of tendencies and bias, just to summarize that in my career so far. So.
Those are really great points, Christine. Thank you. I want to just point out, so I've been doing research in gender bias for the last few years. I've been interviewing a lot of people recently, and what Christine just mentioned, some of those points, almost every single woman that I've talked to has mentioned those things. So whether it's the family issue, not that family's an issue, but for a woman especially, having a family creates a lot of obstacles that it does not for men generally. Things like confidence. When you're looking at a new promotion opportunity or a new job, I've had a lot of women talk to me and tell me that they've had to really train their minds to where even if they don't exactly match every single qualification, it's still okay to apply, right? And they've often been very, very successful in doing so. So thank you, Christine, for bringing that up. Rachel, how about you? Any experiences that you have come to mind as you've prepared?
Yeah, and I would have similar experiences as what Christine mentioned. I just exited the workforce after a 35-year career with Bank of America. So, I go back to the dark ages when things were much worse. So that when I had my daughter, my boss actually called me up on leave and said, "Are you coming back? Because I don't know if you can do the job anymore as a mother. I don't think you can give me what you need to give me." That's against the law at this point, but that was his reality. I asked men, had any of them ever been asked that question? And I think you probably know what the answer is. So I think some of those things have gotten better, but it's no question it's still there. And people ask me all the time when I was going to start a family, and things changed for me when my daughter was born. The other interesting thing from a bias standpoint is it comes from so many different places. So I was actually interviewing a candidate for an analyst job, and we got well into the interview, and he said to me, I was asking him about, how he looked at cash flow and various accounting statistics. And he said, "Wait a minute, you're not in HR, are you?" And I said, no, I would be your boss." And he stopped and leaned back and he said, "I guess I could work for a woman." And that was the end of the interview for me, by the way. But it's interesting where those things pop up at work.
I mean, Rachel, with that career, how has it changed for you? Like, how have you seen this change in terms of how bias is expressed or happens at work?
Well, I wish I could tell you that we took care of that my generation took care of all of those things. We did not, but things are certainly much better. And a lot of that is just because there are laws in place that protect women from a lot of those things. So I think just the awareness and the legal environment around it has changed things a lot. And you can really see a difference with the new generation coming into the workforce, very accepting of women in a leading role. And not so much as you get older, right? And some of that is still there. So I think some of the things still that we need to tackle are around pay. There's also a lot of men who are my age, 50, 60 years old, who are actually very bitter about some of those requirements that have been in place. The last promotion that I got, people told me, "Well, the only reason you got it was because you were a woman. I should have gotten that job." I was surprised at how frank they were with me, honestly. But so there's some of that anger going on right now because of the rules that were put in place. But again, certainly much better. We had 6 weeks of maternity leave. Now we've got 16 weeks of maternity leave. We have paternity leave, which I think has made it much more acceptable to take that time.
Yeah. I was actually talking to someone yesterday about her experiences in the workforce, and she's in the middle of her career, and she was telling me she just interviewed for a job and then found out she was pregnant. And so she started the job and was onboarding, and it was delayed a little bit because it was an academic position, and generally you get hired and then several months pass before you actually start the job. So when she came in to be onboarded through the HR process, she was visibly pregnant at that time, and the HR person was essentially made the comment that, like, you can plan for families, right? Like, why did you get pregnant at this time was kind of the insinuation. And this was not very long ago. It still can happen and does happen, even with people that should know better. So yeah, thank you for sharing that, Rachel. Sam, any thoughts? How have you seen this gender bias happen in your organization?
Well, I guess it's safe to say it has not necessarily impacted me. I work in an industry, unfortunately, where it's probably like 75% of employees are men, probably 85% of executives are men. And has that impacted people I know? Of course, many. Over the course of my career, which is almost 15 years now, I have gotten to know some extremely qualified women who have tried to break in, but could not. Gender bias, extremely qualified women who have struggled to find the right vertical trends in their career, gender bias. So yeah, I think I've gotten to know a lot of people, and it's very obvious why paths for people, or in this case, paths for women, are, especially in my industry, have been a lot harder. There's a lot more roadblocks. And it's not just getting in. I think once you get in, that's the part I wanted to highlight. It's at the leadership level, you just find so few women, and it's not an accident. It has nothing to do with qualification. It has nothing to do with capability. So it's something that myself and other folks in leadership positions at MSD, we think about this a lot. Michael Dell, who is MSD, stands for Michael's initials. Michael's probably one of the visionaries in the field of being a very vocal voice to counter gender bias. So some of those values are deeply entrenched in this organization. Are we perfect by any means? Not even close. Do we have a long way to go? Absolutely. But are we trying to get on that path? I hope so. We're trying.
I'll direct this question at Rachel or Christine, but if you've ever reported, or maybe you know someone that's reported an issue, because there are laws against this, right? You should be able to report things without backlash. What's been the response of managers, or for either on the good side or on the bad side? Like, what have managers been doing and responding to some of these issues?
I can take a first run at it. I think some of what I've seen is a lot of times people, I think there is some like awareness to Rachel's point. I think there is some anger and, people that are like that. But for the most part, I've seen people that aren't even aware they're doing it. And so they don't mean it. They don't mean it to be malicious, but it's just it's a known awareness, but that's not an excuse. So I think from what I've seen, it's positive, but it's still an issue. And so at our company, we've taken a really hard stand on it to do a lot around education. I think there's also an element of, kind of back to your point at the beginning, people, we all grow up differently. We see things, right? Some people grow up in a home where all they saw is their mom at home. So seeing a woman in the workforce is not the natural thing they think of. And so we put a lot of effort around, well, how do you start to get to know the whole person? How do you open up dialogues around cultures? In the Hispanic culture, they take on a lot of the caregiving the female does. And so that puts extra burden on them at home. And, just things like that we just don't think about, that kind of allow people to see the broader picture. And I think give some grace so that people don't, just necessarily react in kind of a more hostile, or, oh, they're not as dedicated, or, oh, they're just complaining, or, oh, they're just loud and obnoxious. So I think we've tried to take that front where if you really take time to get to know people and understand not just even the gender, but religion plays into this, ethnic culture, things like that. It helps people better understand. And then when it comes to like the policies and the reinforcement of that, it's a little bit more, they accept it, and it's not such a hostile environment. So I think, to just sum it up, it's been positive, but a lot of it starts with, oh, I didn't even realize, or I didn't know that was a thing, or I didn't realize, it's this almost, ignorance to what is, to what we should all be aware of. That helps.
Yeah. Thank you. Rachel, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's interesting you pose that question, and I think, I don't know what the answer is. And I think I don't know what the answer is because people don't report things. I think they're still afraid to speak up. that's going to do some damage in the workforce. I had a situation with employees, a woman who was being horribly harassed, and it had gone way over the top before she said anything. It was to the point where she was feeling threatened. So I just don't think those things get reported very frequently. I would tell you I've had a couple different situations, but with clients or with customers that you're working with, I had a customer who came to my boss and just said, I don't want to work with a woman. And that's a tricky situation. And I've had that happen more than once. And I had one boss saying, well, we'll give you another representative and move on down the road. And I had one say, then we don't want to do business with you. So it's, and these are fairly recent. So it's a bit mixed.
Can I ask, from your perspective, Rachel, like, what did that do for you in either case, whether it's having a boss be willing to put another client manager on that, or to take a stand and say, then find somebody else to work with? How did that influence you?
I felt very empowered. I guess when the boss had said to the client, maybe you should take your business elsewhere, and we preach in our culture that's the type of thing that we would do. When you put it to the test, you don't want to give up a customer. That's a big deal, because it was a fair amount of money. I really felt a lot of respect for the manager, for the company in taking that stand.
Oh, that's awesome. Did you have any frank conversations with them afterward to let them know?
With the manager?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
So the last question I want to just bring out before we move on and talk about, like, what are some ways that we can actually address this and try and make a difference, whatever our situation? Why is it that it is so difficult to report it? So when there is an issue, why do so many people hesitate? Because I think this is a really important thing to discuss, a really important thing to bring up.
I think you don't want to be seen as a complainer. I think you just don't want to make a lot of waves. You think maybe it's going to blow over. I think you just don't want to make trouble in the culture.
I would maybe add on to it to say, I know in our world, you kind of think through the process of what happens, and just elaborating on what Rachel said, but what happens after I report it? Well, then they're going to ask the team, right? If they've seen or, seen actions. And then you're like, well, then everyone's going to know. And then I am labeled the complainer or something like that. And so I think some of it too is also, how, when it is reported, the process in which, it's taken afterwards has a big impact on influencing, does the next person do it if they see it? I also do think that it's really hard to sit down with a supervisor, because a lot of people say, have you talked to your boss about it? And it's really hard to sit down with a supervisor, especially if they are getting ready to evaluate you and determine your compensation, and tell them how you don't feel like you're treated equitably or something like that. So I think that, again, it kind of comes from a place of, everyone has to be aware that it's going on and create a safe space or mechanisms to be able to report this without that feeling of repercussion. Because some bosses I think I've had, are very open to it and they would welcome a dialogue. Others, they kind of take offense to that and might become, defensive or something like that. So I think there's a little bit of the process that, at whatever company or organization you're in, being really mindful in the process and the actions you take, and don't overcompensate, but think about how you talk about it, how you then spread the word to make sure it doesn't happen, is really important in influencing. Does the next woman do it if she sees it or feels it? And, what that process looks like.
Yeah, one of the things just to remember for most women, even if they go into a career, say like where there is many women, more women than men. Again, this concept of vertical segregation means that as you move up the ladder, so to speak, there's fewer and fewer women in the room. I was meeting with a healthcare worker the other day, and she's doing very well in her career, but and it's all women. And she's not just a nurse; she's actually a very good surgeon. But all the leadership team is men, and so she's tried to have this conversation before, and it actually resulted in some backlash, essentially, where she was removed from an important committee that she really cared about. And this wasn't just within her leadership, but even going, up and above to some of the people like the chief HR officer that was constantly saying, let us know if we can ever do anything. And the minute she says something, there starts to become an awkwardness or something happens, and it really made it difficult. So for those of you who are listening, please just be aware that in many cases, as a minority, of whether that's a woman, as a man, a race, whatever, when you're from a stereotypical position, a minority, it makes it very hard to try and report anything. Especially if, like Christine, you said, you're the only woman in the room, right? That is really difficult. So yeah, we're going to shift now. And one of the things I hope everyone comes away with is just a sense that things are definitely getting better. There's been a lot of progress being made, but there's still a great deal of progress to be made. As I've started learning and started studying this more, one of the things that's really surprised me, it's very well documented that gender bias exists, and it exists in many forms. As Christine pointed out, like it can be exacerbated or things like race, things like sexual orientation, religion, all of these things combine, and they can actually make the bias worse. The problem that I've seen is that there's actually very little knowledge about how we fix the problem. Okay, there's not a go-to source that tells you if you have this type of bias happening in your organization, this is what you should do. It's a very complicated thing. This is something that we grow up with. Part of it's biological, it's cultural. I mean, there's all these different forces acting on it that kind of ingrain these things in us. It's really hard to change. And it's a very complicated situation. So what I want to do now is just talk and maybe try and bring up some things about what can you do. I've had a couple of questions come in already. As a man, what can we do? And I'll address that here in a little bit. But I want to just first, I guess, ask our three panelists, have you tried to reduce bias in your organization? How easy is it? And what are some tips that you can give? What has worked? Rachel, would you mind going first?
No, I'd be happy to. As I was thinking about us getting together today and talking, I think one of the really important things that I focused a lot on the last few years is pay. Because that is a data point that certainly indicates that there is an issue, because there is a difference in pay between what women make and what men make. I managed a group of about 150 people, and so I had visibility to a broad pay spectrum, and you could see it. I mean, you could do a couple sorts and it was pretty clear. So I think some of the things that I spent time was really coaching women on how to do a better job with that, because women come in at the same pay as men. At Bank of America, they do. But along the way, it makes a big difference, even for women who have been consistent, because there's a lot of story about if you leave the workforce and come back, you're not as valuable, you're not going to get paid the same. But for those women who stayed in the workforce, it's still the same. I found, and it was fascinating to me because I didn't know this until I became a manager of a large group, was that men are far more aggressive about asking for pay. about telling you what their value is, and being pretty demanding and sometimes threatening. And that's a harsh word, but men saying, hey, if you don't do this for me, I may have to go find something else. And I never had a woman say that to me. And when I would pay people, women very consistently would thank me. A couple men would thank me. Most women would say, should have been more. And I think women need to have that awareness, because there's a pool of money that has to go around. And as a manager, it's easy, women are never going to complain about it. I'll just give it to the men is really the easy response to that. If maybe I'm going to lose this guy because I'm not going to give him enough pay, and the she's sticking around. So we need to learn better about how to understand our value, and about how to present to decision makers.
That's great point. Sim, any thoughts for your organization?
Sure. I think you said how easy is it to reduce gender bias in any organization? It's not easy. I think the fact that we still have such a long ways to go, hearing from the other panelists, probably means it's not easy at all. I think let's talk a little bit about why is it not easy, and the other two panelists alluded to both of those issues. First, a lot of these biases is not explicit, so that makes it much harder. And the second part becomes about the organization culture. So let's talk about biases, right? Not having biases, as you said earlier, is technically a no-brainer. You want to have the right ratios of people with different experiences, backgrounds, thought processes, and so forth. And then you start thinking about things like thoroughness, empathy levels, pain threshold. All of these things should encourage better discussions, better disagreements, and probably make an organization better, right? Sure. Now, we can also agree that women probably will score a lot higher in a lot of those areas that I mentioned. Then why am I working in an industry where 75% people happen to be men, 85% in executive role happen to be men? It's not just Wall Street, big tech, small tech, tech's the same way. So it's not easy to overcome, given it's driven mostly by implicit biases. So what I do want to say is that it's not about intentions or goodwill, but good intentions and goodwill is absolutely not enough. It takes real leadership, real vision, real purpose, and possibly a maniacal dedication to reduce and possibly eliminate gender bias. The second part you said is like, what has actually worked, or like what works? I mean, I don't know if a lot has worked, right? Like, I mean, we're talking about, this is a work in a progress at best. So, but I do feel that you want to think in terms of how to get it to work. So the way we tend to think about it, we say, okay, at a higher level, you want to have a clear process, which should be enforceable. There have to be repercussions. So you think words, action, measurement, and repercussions. You want to keep this in some kind of an infinite loop. So you do want to talk about, you can communicate the plan and measure certain metrics, and having repercussions around failures. So a lot of people do diversity thresholds, but these can't just be vanity metrics, right? It's about creating a culture that's deeply built around this purpose. It is about valuing women, not just accommodating them. So when you start checking boxes, you're saying, okay, we got to hit a certain quota. No, that's just not enough. So I do think fixing that culture probably fixes that issue. It has to be endorsed at the very top. It has to be a passion project for the CEO. And one thing I would love to get the other panelists to opine on is, one of the things I learned is, when we talk about creating an environment where firm policies are built around valuing women, so we talk about family leave and healthcare for dependents and so forth. There's other intangibles too. We want to make sure that ideas and thoughts from our female counterparts are heard and credited. Mentors are assigned, probably among firm leadership, because there's the vacuum at the top there, and frequent and appropriate feedback along with ways to improve. So this last part is very important, in my opinion. So I read a study which analyzed performance feedbacks, and that tells you how messed up us men are here. So the annual performance review analysis revealed something very disturbing. I'll quote this for you. Around 80% or so annual performance for women included feedback and constructive criticism around personality, things like don't be emotional, watch your tone, keep your emotions in check. You know what the number was for men? 2%. We got a problem. Now, when organizations did the same thing on a weekly or monthly basis, this went away. So, so it became much more job specific. So there are definitely some very practical ways to eliminate these perceived performance differential, which in my opinion is mostly driven by implicit biases. So there's a lot we could do, but this is not even, I would say, inning one. I mean, we haven't done anything yet.
I'll maybe just add on. We probably have read the same study as them, because I think it's staggering to see some of these metrics. I would say, in my experience in my company, is we've taken a big stand, which I think is great. A first step where pay actively addressing that. Right, there's a lot of metrics and analysis going on around that, which is wonderful. More work to do, but we're making progress. Metrics, to Sim's point. We have started publishing, it used to be kind of this coveted report that showed where women were, how they were progressing, which fields and roles. We now publish it to the company every quarter so we can see, and it's very clearly to see quarter over quarter, where have we made progress in pulling women up vertically, moving them across the business versus not. And we also include ethnicity in that, which I think is really important. And what we've seen is, yes, we're making progress, but it's slow. It's hard because you have to really work to pull and build your pipeline. It doesn't just happen overnight. And if it does, that's a flag, like Rachel said, where you start to get someone just appeared there to check the box because they are a woman or they are X. And so, you kind of have to expect that some of it is going to be slow, but you need to see that steady progress. So pay, metrics, surveys, I think we've done a lot of work to try and, curb our questions to where it's not just, at the general population, but they specifically, one example I can think of, they did in our business, women in technology, what type of workplace is this, and asking us questions to really get, especially in that area where, there aren't a lot, the woman population, female population is much smaller, to try and get that specific feedback to really pinpoint areas where the environment needs to be ventilated. We need to do more work there. So I think those are a few things that I've seen. But some of the things that I try and think about when I break this down is, okay, what can I do myself? What can my peers do? And then if I'm in a management position, what can I, what happens there? And I think some of the folks on this call, you're probably going to find yourselves in varying levels of those positions. But from a self perspective, to me, it's, kind of like what we talked about earlier, that confidence. You have to really push yourself to, kind of fight some of just the natural personality, habits of, okay, I'm not quite ready for that role, or I can't do that, or I shouldn't apply for that. You really have to push yourself and your confidence to really do that. And I talk to my manager openly about that. And that also goes for speaking up on calls or in meetings. I'm naturally someone that likes to listen, understand, and then I'll chime in. But I really push myself, and I've talked to my manager about that, and he knows that. And so he'll specifically, hey, Christine, can you chime in first, right, before anybody else? And so I think, as you think about kind of yourself and then also environments you're in, fostering that sort of environment starts to help pull this along, because you may get to the end of the call and, the only woman in the room has not spoken up. And then it's like, was she even there, right? Was her input even valued or listened to? So those are a couple of things that I would think about, and they kind of get back to culture, what was just mentioned. As far as a peer, if I had to categorize that and say, what can you do? There's a lot around allyship, and kind of back to what I talked about. We started this thing in our company called Dine. And basically what you do is you just sit down, you have a meal, but you really try and understand the stories of people, right? You talk about all the things that are taboo, right? How'd you grow up? Rich or poor, religion, what do you want to do in life? But it's really kind of opening up and creating this safe space to understand people and their background, and try and foster this environment of, when you get to know a whole person, it really helps you see more of the similarities versus the differences, and so that you don't just assume things. And I think that's a really important piece, that no matter what level you're in, if you have control or not, you can do a good job of that. You can make people feel welcome. You can make the effort to do that. And I think that's really important. And then from a manager perspective, I've seen a lot of, especially amongst women and men, allyship in mentoring circles, right? How do I actively take a role at Hassan's point, take action in, okay, Christine, I understand what you want to do. I am going to actively help pull you. I'm going to put your name up for opportunities. I'm going to meet with you regularly, because it's not just about being promoted or getting to the next job, but it's making sure that the people know my skills, and I may not tout it or be as aggressive about it, like Rachel mentioned, as a man would. That just may not be my personality. So they actively help and push me to do that, but then also speak up and help represent me when I'm not in the room, because we know that you have to do that double time for women, because there aren't as many of us speaking up for other women in those rooms, at the C level. So those are just a few of the ways that I think about it. And when I assess kind of our organization and the different roles I've been in, things that can be done, that really, don't require a ton of, huge rules and policies, the pay, the metrics, those things do. But these are things you can do every day, and just the way you approach your team, your work, that sort of thing.
Those are really, really good points. Thank you. I was talking to a woman in Arkansas. She's done very, very well in her career. And we were talking about a lot of these same questions. And we've all heard of the acronym DEI, right? Diversity, equity, and inclusion. So with diversity, generally the idea is to bring in, there's if not equal numbers, but there's representation, right? Like men and women, different views, whether that's, again, ethnic backgrounds or whatever it may be. Equity is more getting at what Rachel's talking about, right? Like paying people for what they're worth, and paying them equally, right? It's about equal opportunity. And then the I is about inclusion, and Christine, I think you've made a couple of comments so far, like when you've been in the room, right? And are you really included in the discussion, right? Her suggestion to me was to add a B onto the end of that. And the B stands for belonging. And as hard as we might try to increase diversity, as hard as we might try to increase equity and inclusion, but do people really feel like they belong in the organization? And Christine, as you're talking about having these open and frank conversations, which I actually find it's kind of, well, not funny, but like we actually have laws, like when we're hiring somebody, we can't get into a lot of those more personal matters, right? And we tend to almost sterilize people, almost in some cases, I would say to a fault, right? If we can't have these open and frank conversations, I think that almost increases our reliance on these biases. But again, like I want one of the things I'd like you to remember from this session is, do people feel like they belong in your organization? Because it's a really, really important part of people's lives. And if they don't, however well you might try to increase diversity, your equity or inclusion even, like it's truly not, I mean, that bias is still having an effect.
I would add one of the things that has stuck with me. I counted up the other day. I think I've had every boss in my 12 jobs so far, my 12 rotations, has been a male except for one woman. And as I thought about what the really great ones did, as I started kind of rising and, trying to get promotions and things like that, is they would make sure that because of most of the meetings we were in, I was all male, they would introduce me. They would always introduce me and kind of welcome me. Even like, we would be in 6-7 meetings a day together. He would always introduce me. This is Christine, and he would always say some nice complimentary thing too, normally, which was really awesome. But he would introduce me. And I think back to that point of like welcoming, I would notice that I just didn't tend to just like interrupt everyone and shake their hand, maybe, and especially if we were late getting started. And so just that small action kind of created that environment of being welcome. And I think that goes for races, or people that look different, that don't see anybody else like them in the room. That point of feeling welcome, little things like that can go a long way. And there are studies that even show like just doing something like that makes someone more likely to speak up, more likely to participate, more likely to, share their ideas, their diverse ideas. And at the end of the day, that's good business, because you may think you have the best ideas, but if the whole room looks like each other and those are the ideas that are shared and you aren't representative of your customer base, you're likely going to lose in the workplace. And so I think that that's always something that stuck with me of just how do I welcome people? How do I introduce them? Do I take the time to do that so they feel welcome? So just like a small nugget that's not rocket science, but is really easy to do.
Thanks, Christine. I guess we're just about out of time before we move into the question and answer session. But just for each of you, if you could name one thing, and maybe Christine, this was your one thing that's made a difference for you in your career, or a sim for you, what's made a difference? What's been the best practice that maybe people could take away, male or female, whatever it might be, like what's helped? Sim, let's start with you.
Well, I think let me first address from a man's perspective, and then we'll go to the more important piece. Is I think as we go through a lot of these conversations, I do feel that men play a very critical role in getting better, solving this problem. So I do feel that men should be given a seat at this table as well as a shared purpose. The one thing which we all need to do, and we're pretty crappy at that, is when you say what has worked, is one thing we all as men need to do is listen with respect, with empathy, and with appreciation. And remember, it's not about you, especially when we're talking these issues, right? Second, get involved. And I said before, it's just having the right intentions and goodwill is not enough. It's just the start. In fact, there's a famous Dr. Martin Luther King quote, which is, an understanding that's shallow from people of goodwill is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding from people with ill will. So develop a deep empathy towards this problem. So I think that's the most important thing. And the second part of the question was, can you repeat that real quick? Because I missed that.
Just if there's a best practice you would leave
I think
with.
we all touched on that, right? I think one of the things I would definitely say that like the metrics piece, because when we get lost into this qualitative BS, then it's very easy. Then it becomes then it becomes opinionated, becomes subjective, right? If you can't measure it, you can't evaluate, you can't fix it, right? And it should not be vanity metrics. I think you want, like, pay is a great one, right? We can get 50% of females in an organization, but if we're paying them 20% less, then it's pretty bad. So I do feel that like an absolute maniacal focus on looking at numbers and making sure we're improving them over frequent intervals.
Thank you. Rachel?
Oops, there we go. About 10 years ago at the bank, and maybe it was longer than that, we started up groups called Power of 10. And so 10 women who were probably in the same vicinity would come together on a regular basis and talk about these types of issues. And it was a really interesting experience because you think you're the only one. And that may go back to your question, Joel, of, why do people not speak up? And there was some power in that knowledge of getting together with other women. And so it got to be that there were 2,000 people engaged in these different groups of 10 all over the country doing this type of work. About 3 or 4 years ago, we started to include men because I think we needed to go through that process first and bond as women and have some understanding and some assurances about what we were feeling and experiencing. But it is absolutely critical that men are engaged too and that they understand. So I think that was a really important move. But that was a really powerful and exceptional thing in my career was to start with those groups.
Thank you. It's amazing what again, I just point out like this discussion of power, right? As a minority, whatever it may be in whatever situation, there's a big power differential. And for someone who lacks power, it is very, very difficult to feel like they can speak up, right? And so there really needs to be an emphasis on providing empathy, understanding, respect, right? And it doesn't need to be unearned, right? Like if somebody's not doing their job, like that's one thing. But if you're making decisions based solely on some of these biases, you need to understand this has a real impact, and oftentimes a very negative impact on individuals and their families, and like it makes a big impact. All right, we're going to move to the question and answer session. I've had a couple of questions come in. First one was just regarding, and I've had this question before, but we're talking about gender here, and there's an increasing awareness of like gender identity. What I want to just help you understand from my perspective why I've used the term gender bias, and this is really common for a lot of the academic literature. Whatever the gender identity may be, when somebody sees you, they're still making these very quick, implicit, cognitive judgments about you. And we use information like somebody's biological sex to make these decisions, and it has an impact. So we're not talking a lot about the difference between, biological sex versus gender identity, but the reality is with a lot of these biases, they're going to impact you either way. The other thing I just want to point out, again, whether we're talking about gender bias, whether we're talking about racial bias, religious bias, age bias, sexual orientation, like there's all of these different types of biases that just happen as human beings. I hope you will find and understand that what we've talked about today, a lot of these things, whether we're trying to address gender bias or something else, these things will address more than one type of bias, right? Treating people decently it does a lot of good, more than I think we give it credit for sometimes. The second question I want to bring up, and this was for Christine specifically. Christine, they say, how should we as a society and as an individual tackle bias that people aren't even aware they have?
It's a great question. If you were going to give me one thing, since I probably already used up my one things that I would leave with folks, my thing would be to educate yourself, right? Because I think that's the thing is and we mentioned it earlier, sometimes you don't even know what a bias is. And so I would encourage you, there's a ton of great resources, TED Talks and things where people talk about different ways they have felt that, right? So as an example, people being talked over, that's a really common one. Or, kind of the question I brought up at the beginning, like asking people about when they're going to start a family. A lot of people don't realize that you are immediately, maybe subconsciously thinking things as a result of asking those sorts of questions. So I think the more you can do to educate yourself on, okay, the way I grew up, the things that have formed me as a person have created biases in my life. I need to be aware of what those are, because it's not that I can change them. I am who I am, but what I can change is how I react and what I think about after I hear that or see that or listen to that. So it's a personal journey that I think you have to understand yourself and know where your weaknesses are, because they truly are. I think there are weaknesses if you're not aware of them. I think if you're aware of them, you can work to understand them and make sure that you're not putting another person in a compromising situation without knowing that. So hopefully that helps answer the question.
Yeah, it's great. And I would just add, like, I've done a lot of interviews at this point. Almost every single woman I've talked to has talked about this exact thing: the importance of educating themselves on what their own biases are. Biases don't just affect how other people or how you see other people, they also affect how you see yourself. So sometimes the bias is not necessarily happening from other people. It's actually you yourself keeping yourself from, whether it's applying for promotion or having the confidence to do something. Like, this is part of the, you can't necessarily change what somebody else is doing, but make sure that as you're moving forward, you understand how the mind works, and so that you can start to address some of these. So if there's not, you can fix a lot of things on your own as well. That's not to say like there's not other people causing problems, but there are things you can do. Rachel, any thoughts?
I would echo a lot of what Christine said. I think there is tremendous training that's going on, especially in larger organizations, that really bring an awareness to things, which has been helpful. There's no question about it. So I think, I think education for yourself or coming from your organization is key.
Right. One of the other questions we've had come in is whether your firms have like an employee resource group or these women's professional networking groups. And if so, have these efforts made a significant impact on some of these organizational metrics like Asim was talking about?
I know at our corporation, we have those. We have Women of Finance, Women of AT&T, all sorts of things. And I would say that something I love about that, and kind of to one of the Sim's points earlier, is that it's not just for women. Men can join and are encouraged to join as well. And I think that's a real key component in seeing some of those, because a lot of those have been around for a while, which is awesome. But I think having men in there has really made it a richer, more impactful experience and kind of helping us change the tide, move some metrics. So I would absolutely encourage that, but I would caveat to say, make sure you don't isolate, kind of to Rachel's point earlier. There's, you pull them in, they're important part of the equation.
Okay. Sorry, I'm going to ask we're just about out of time at this point, and I've got two questions left that I absolutely want to ask. The first one is, for our female students that are watching this, what advice would you give them? They're people that are just starting to move out in their career.
I mean, obviously, I hear that question and I think, what do I wish I knew, right? When I had started on this journey, it would absolutely to be more confident. And with that, probably a bit more aggressive. I tended to think that, if I worked really hard and I did a good job, that would be enough, right? My managers would recognize that, they would pay me for that, they would promote me for that. And that's a big part of the equation, certainly, but you've got to be self-promoting, which I was not good at, but it's absolutely critical. And I imagine every single one of you have a reason to be self-confident. If you've come out of this university, you've got some legs to stand on. So that absolutely would be it.
I 100% echo what Rachel said. I think that's one of the most important things you can do for yourself.
I think I'd probably summarize this by saying, especially for all the younger students, the ones who are on the cusp of graduating and moving on, find an organization that values you, not just accommodates you, or even better, go start one. Think big, act bigger, take risks, make a lot of mistakes. You're very young, be bold. And when it comes to these type of issues, just be a leader. And then when people say, well, when you're very young and you happen to be in a situation where you feel some of these biases, there's an answer: quit. Right? Be vocal about it and then quit, or quit and then be vocal about it. There's many different ways to do that. You will never regret it. And I firmly believe if enough people, especially enough younger people can do that, between gender bias or any other kind of bias and the organization, one will permanently disappear. So I do feel that a lot of the panelists talked about the intimidation or the fear that comes from it. I think if enough people at a very young age are taught not to put up with this BS, I think if enough people do that, with I don't like using the word aggression, but be aggressive, go do it. And I think that's what I would advise all young people.
All right, last question. So this one is for our male students. Asim, you've talked a little bit about this, and it's been brought up, the importance of allyship. But for my male students, what advice would you give them? What can they do? We've talked a little bit. There's some anger, right? Like, as a man, sometimes you can feel threatened by everything that's all the dialogue and the importance, whether that's justified or not. We're not going to talk about here, but what advice should we give them?
a lot of this probably not justified to start with, so just stop whining about it. But I do feel, in all seriousness, right? I give the same advice that I gave to the female students, and I said, find an organization that values these things. Go start one which you think, make your mistakes, be bold and whatnot. And when it comes to some of these issues, I think I might have addressed this in one of the earlier points I made, is we as men need to learn to listen a little bit better. I think that the odds have been stacked in our favor for possibly 100 generations. And we got to wake up and say, that's not right. So learn to realize what's important and learn to stand for what you think is right. So I do think listening is very important. Understanding and empathy. I also saw a question as I was reading through these Q&As is, well, how do I not engage in microaggressions when I'm speaking or talking about like the opposite sex or and whatnot? And I think that again comes from a little bit of empathy, a little bit of asking people around you questions, read a little bit more, work on being kinder and nicer. Then you will ask yourself, would this make sense if I were to say certain words or language or tones and so forth? So I do think so. I think so. We have a long way to go. It starts with listening. It starts with empathy. It starts with getting involved.
We're basically out of time, but Rachel, I would love to hear your thoughts on this question. What would you wish your male colleagues would have known or
yeah,
done?
I think, well, for the folks who are on this call, I think the fact that you are on this call is a really great sign. Because I would tell you to be open-minded, to join these groups, to listen to what women have to say. I've heard on occasion from men, well, that, we've fixed the gender bias at this point, right? And I think they've closed their minds at that point, but you need to hear some of the stories, and there still are differences. So, and help. You can absolutely raise your voice and be a big part of this.
Thank you. Well, thank you again. We are out of time. I want to tell each of our panelists, thank you for taking the time to be with us. For the students who are participating, there's a QR code that's just will be displayed here in a little bit that you can receive your EDGE credits for. But again, thank you. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me, and I'm happy to connect you with whoever can best help you. But yeah, thank you again. This has been a great pleasure.